HOA lawyers sent me a threat, but their biggest mistake was putting it in writing. The morning Linda Carver came flying through my ranch gate, she nearly sent one of my horses through a fence and told me the road belonged to her HOA now. At first, I thought it was just another entitled neighbor looking for a shortcut. But the deeper I dug, the stranger it got. Lawyers started showing up. Buyers started asking questions. Old county records started telling a very different story. And before it was over, one road, one hidden document, and one decision before sunrise would turn the entire fight upside down. If you've ever seen someone act like they own something that isn't theirs, you're going to want to stick around for this one. And before we get started, take a second to subscribe if you enjoy stories about ranch life, property rights, and ordinary folks standing their ground with patience, grit, and a little common sense. Now let me tell you what happened. I've lived on the same 80 acres my entire life. My grandfather bought this ranch outside Brenham, Texas, when the land was little more than scrub grass and stubborn mesquite. My father expanded it. I inherited it. Every fence post, every cattle path, every stretch of dirt carried a story I knew by heart. Most mornings followed the same rhythm. Coffee on the porch. A quick look over the eastern pasture. Then a slow drive down the ranch road that cut from the county highway through my property and back toward the house. The road wasn't fancy. It was gravel, packed hard by decades of trucks, tractors, and cattle trailers. But it belonged to me. The deed said so. The county records said so. The old survey markers hammered into the ground decades ago said so. That should have been the end of the discussion. Unfortunately, it wasn't. The trouble started 6 months after the Willow Creek Estates subdivision opened next to my western fence line. The development brought expensive houses, decorative stone entrances, and an HOA that seemed to believe rules applied to everyone except themselves. At the center of it all was Linda Carver, HOA president, former real estate agent, professional busybody, and apparently an expert on property she didn't own. The first time she drove through my ranch gate, I assumed she was lost. The second time, I stopped her. The third time, I put up signs. Private property. No through traffic. Ranch access only. The signs lasted about a week before somebody knocked one down. After that, Linda stopped pretending she didn't know. She simply acted like the road belonged to her. That morning started like every other. The sun had barely cleared the horizon when I stepped outside with my coffee mug. The air smelled faintly of hay and fresh-cut grass. A few horses were grazing near the road. Everything was quiet. Then I heard an engine. Not a pickup, not a ranch truck, an SUV. Fast. Too fast. I turned toward the gate just as a black luxury SUV blasted through it. Gravel sprayed from the tires. Dust exploded behind it, and one of my horses jumped sideways. I shouted. The mare bolted across the pasture. Another horse followed. The SUV never slowed. It kept charging down the road like it owned the place. Then the driver laid on the horn. One long blast. The horses scattered. My coffee hit the dirt, and my patience finally snapped. I started walking toward the vehicle before it even stopped. The driver's side window slid down. Linda Carver sat behind the wheel wearing oversized sunglasses and a smile that immediately irritated me. "Morning, Caleb," she said. "You almost hit my horse." "I didn't hit anything. You were flying through the gate. It's a road." "No," I said. "It's my road." Her smile widened. There was something about it that always felt rehearsed, like she'd spent years practicing how to look friendly while being disrespectful. "Well," she said, "that's still up for debate." I stared at her. Debate? The community uses this road. The community is trespassing. She laughed. Actually laughed. As if I'd just told a joke. You really need to stop thinking of everything as yours. I felt my jaw tighten. My family owned this land before that subdivision existed. Things change. Property lines don't. She glanced toward the road stretching behind her. The HOA board disagrees. The HOA board doesn't own this ranch. We'll see. That sentence hung in the air. Simple. Confident. Annoying. We'll see. Not maybe. Not I think. Not let's discuss it. We'll see. Like ownership itself was negotiable. Like enough arrogance could rewrite county records. I took a step closer to the SUV, Linda. What? You keep saying we, because this affects the whole community. No, I said. It affects you. For the first time, her smile faded. Only slightly. But enough. She adjusted her sunglasses. You know what your problem is? I'm sure you're about to tell me. You don't understand growth. I laughed. A short laugh. Not because it was funny. Because it was ridiculous. My problem is people driving across my ranch. You're blocking progress. I'm protecting private property. She shook her head. Same thing to some people. Then she shifted the SUV into drive. Conversation over. At least from her perspective. The vehicle rolled forward. I stepped back. And before she accelerated away, she looked directly at me. This road belongs to the community now, Caleb. Then she drove off. The dust cloud swallowed the road behind her. I stood there watching until the SUV disappeared. The horses slowly settled. The ranch became quiet again. But something felt different. Because that wasn't the first confrontation. It was probably the 10th. Maybe the 15th. Every month she pushed a little further. Every month the HOA got a little bolder. And every month they acted less like neighbors and more like owners. I walked back toward the house. Maggie was already standing on the porch. She'd seen the whole thing. That bad? She asked. Worse. She almost hit the horses? Yep. Maggie frowned. She can't keep doing this. No. Then why does she? That question followed me the rest of the day. Why? Why keep using the road? Why ignore the signs? Why challenge something so clearly documented? People usually trespass for convenience. But convenience didn't explain confidence. Linda wasn't acting like someone sneaking across private property. She was acting like someone certain she would eventually own it. That difference bothered me. Because confidence like that usually came from somewhere. Evidence, a plan, or a secret. That afternoon, I drove the property line, checked the fences, checked the gate. Everything looked normal. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was happening. Something I wasn't seeing. As the sun began to set, I stopped near the gate and looked toward the subdivision. A line of expensive houses sat beyond the trees. New money. New residents. New promises. And somewhere inside that neighborhood, Linda Carver seemed awfully determined to get control of One Ranch Road. The question wasn't whether she would try again. I already knew she would. The real question was why she wanted it so badly. And I was about to find out. 3 days after my confrontation with Linda, I was repairing a section of fence near the county road when I saw Roy Henson's mail truck pull onto the shoulder. Roy had delivered mail around this county for nearly 20 years. He knew everybody. More importantly, everybody trusted him. When Roy stopped to talk, there was usually a reason. He climbed out of the truck holding a stack of envelopes. You got a minute, Caleb, sure? He glanced toward Willow Creek Estates before lowering his voice. You still having trouble with Linda Carver? I laughed. Depends on your definition of trouble. Roy didn't smile. That immediately got my attention. I heard something yesterday. I leaned against the fence post. What kind of something? The expensive kind. Now he had my full attention. Roy scratched his chin. I was delivering certified mail to one of those model homes in the subdivision. Couple from Houston was touring properties, so I heard Linda giving them the sales pitch. What sales pitch? Roy pointed toward my ranch. Yours. I stared at him. What are you talking about? She was telling them the neighborhood had exclusive ranch access. I felt my stomach tighten. Exclusive what? Private ranch access. Scenic driving routes. Nature trails. Authentic Texas views. Every word made less sense than the one before it. Roy, I'm serious. He shifted his mailbag. She pointed right at your road while talking. My road. The same road she'd spent months claiming belonged to the community. The same road she'd been driving through every day. Suddenly the pieces started moving. Not fitting together yet, just moving. What exactly did she say? Roy thought for a moment. Something about homeowners having access to unique ranch amenities that couldn't be found anywhere else in the county. Amenities. The word irritated me more than it should have. My family's property wasn't an amenity. It wasn't a golf course. It wasn't a clubhouse. It wasn't something an HOA could advertise on a brochure. Did the buyers believe her? Roy gave a slow nod. Looked impressed. I looked toward the subdivision. Rows of expensive homes sat beyond the fence line. New roofs, new landscaping, new money. And suddenly I saw something I hadn't considered before. Value. Not the value of land. The value of perception. If Linda convinced buyers they were getting access to ranch views, ranch roads, and private countryside experiences, those homes became easier to sell, more desirable, more expensive. How many people were on the tour? I asked. 5 or 6. And she specifically mentioned the road? More than once. I thanked Roy and watched his truck disappear down the highway. Then I stood there for several minutes, staring at the gate. Everything felt different now. Because convenience didn't explain Linda's behavior. Money did. That evening, Maggie listened quietly while I explained what Roy had overheard. She set down her coffee cup. That would explain a lot, wouldn't it? She's not trying to use the road. I looked at her. No. She's trying to sell it. That sentence hit harder than anything Roy had said. Because Maggie was right. Linda wasn't acting like someone borrowing access. She was acting like someone marketing it. The next morning, I made a decision. If Linda wanted to keep using my property, I was going to document every second of it. I drove into town and bought 4 trail cameras. Not hunting cameras. Security cameras. The kind that automatically recorded time, date, and motion. By sunset, I had them installed. 1 at the gate. 1 overlooking the road. 1 near the pasture crossing. 1 pointed toward the subdivision entrance. Then I waited. I didn't have to wait long. The first recording came the very next morning. 7:12 a.m. Linda's SUV. Same speed. Same road. Same confidence. The second recording happened at lunchtime. Different vehicle. A luxury SUV with out-of-state plates. The driver followed Linda through the gate. Then another. And another. By the end of the week, I had footage of 12 separate vehicles crossing my property. Some were residents. Some weren't. Several stopped along the road to take pictures. One couple even climbed out and walked toward a creek overlook that sat entirely on my ranch. I watched the footage twice, then a third time. Every recording raised the stakes. Because this wasn't random anymore. It was organized, intentional, profitable. The following Saturday brought the moment that confirmed everything. I was feeding cattle near the south pasture when I heard multiple engines approaching. I looked up and saw a small convoy entering through the gate, Linda's SUV in front. 3 vehicles behind her. I grabbed my binoculars. People stepped out. Well-dressed couples, real estate folders in hand. They weren't trespassing by accident. They were on a tour. Linda stood near the road pointing toward different sections of my ranch. Even from a distance, I could see her gesturing confidently. Selling, explaining, promising. Whatever she was telling those buyers, she acted like she owned every acre she pointed at. Anger surged through me, but I stayed exactly where I was. Because anger wasn't evidence. The cameras were. I let them record everything. Every vehicle, every stop, every minute. That night I reviewed the footage. The timestamps told the story. 3 hours, 3 separate property tours, dozens of references to areas Linda had no authority to discuss. I created a new folder on my computer. Willow Creek evidence, then another, trespass records, then another, vehicle logs. For the first time, I wasn't just defending my property. I was building a case. The question was no longer whether Linda was crossing the line. The question was how many people had already paid money because of it. And somewhere inside Willow Creek Estates, the answer was probably a lot bigger than I realized. I got my first clue the following Monday. The envelope arrived by certified mail. Thick, official-looking, the kind designed to intimidate before you even open it. I was standing in the kitchen when Maggie handed it to me. "Lawyers?" she asked. "Looks expensive." That turned out to be an accurate description. Inside was a letter from a Houston law firm representing the Willow Creek Estates HOA. According to the document, my ranch road was no longer being treated as private property. The letter claimed it had become a community access route through years of regular public use. I read that sentence twice. Then a third time. It was nonsense. Not legally questionable, not debatable, simply false. The road had always been private. The county records showed it. The deed showed it. The surveys showed it. Yet somehow a group of lawyers had signed their names beneath the claim. At the bottom of the letter sat a demand. Remove all restrictions to community access. Cease interference with resident travel, or face legal action. Maggie read over my shoulder. "You've got to be kidding." "I wish." "What are they trying to do?" I folded the papers carefully. They're creating a paper trail. Because that was exactly what it looked like. The HOA wasn't trying to prove ownership. They were trying to manufacture the appearance of ownership. If enough documents existed, enough complaints, enough official-looking letters, then maybe people would start believing the road belonged to them, the same way Linda had started believing it. That afternoon, I drove into town and visited the county clerk's office. I pulled copies of every document connected to my property. The deed. The surveys. Boundary records. Tax maps. Easement filings. Everything. By the time I returned home, I had a stack of records nearly 3 inches thick. I started organizing them into binders. If the HOA wanted a paper war, I intended to be ready. Unfortunately, Linda wasn't finished escalating. 2 days later, a county inspector showed up. He climbed out of a truck carrying a clipboard. Professional. Polite. Clearly uncomfortable. Mr. Whitaker? That's me. We received a complaint regarding agricultural equipment storage. I stared at him. What complaint? The report claims you're operating unauthorized commercial machinery near residential property. I looked toward my barn. The tractor sitting there had belonged to my father. The hay baler had been parked in the same location for years. Nothing had changed, except the HOA next door. The inspector spent 20 minutes walking the property, then closed his clipboard. Everything appears compliant. Imagine that. He almost smiled. I figured as much. The complaint disappeared. The next one arrived 3 days later. Noise violations. Apparently, my cattle were disturbing subdivision residents. I actually laughed when I read that one. The county didn't. The complaint was dismissed within hours. Then came allegations about fencing, then drainage, then vehicle traffic. Every week brought something new. Every complaint required time. Documentation, responses. The strategy became obvious. Linda wasn't trying to win. She was trying to exhaust me. One afternoon, I was reviewing paperwork when another alert appeared on one of my security cameras. I opened the footage. Linda again. But this time, she wasn't alone. She had 2 men walking beside her. One carried a clipboard. The other carried rolled blueprints. The 3 of them stopped near my gate. Then Linda pointed directly down the ranch road. The men nodded. One took notes. I watched the footage twice, then zoomed in. Whatever they were discussing, it wasn't casual. It looked like planning. That bothered me. A lot. I copied the footage into a separate folder. Then another notification arrived. This one from Roy Henson. The message was simple. Call me. I picked up immediately. You hear something? I asked. More than something. His voice sounded uneasy. Linda's been talking. About what? Future expansion. I frowned. Expansion of what? The subdivision. That got my attention. Roy continued. People are saying new phases are being planned. Okay. Some of those plans apparently include direct ranch access. I felt my grip tighten on the phone. Direct ranch access. Not possible, not legal. Yet somehow the phrase kept appearing, like it had become part of the sales pitch, part of the marketing, part of the dream being sold to buyers. The same buyers who probably believed every word. That evening, I added another section to my evidence binder. Claims. Inside went the legal letter, the dismissed complaints, the camera footage, the notes from Roy. Everything. Because every false claim revealed something important. Not about the road. About Linda. People don't usually spend this much effort chasing property they know they can't own, unless losing that property would cost them something. As the binder grew thicker, one thought kept returning. If Linda was willing to involve lawyers, inspectors, complaints, and potential development plans, then whatever she was hiding had to be worth far more than a shortcut through my ranch. The question was, what? And sooner or later, she was going to make a mistake big enough to reveal it. The mistake arrived in the form of a phone call. The caller introduced herself as Ellen Price, a property attorney from Brenham. I'd heard her name before. Around this county, Ellen had a reputation for knowing land law better than most judges. I received a copy of your HOA letter, she said. That surprised me. How? Roy Henson's cousin works in my office. I laughed despite myself. Small-town Texas had a way of connecting people whether you wanted it to or not. Ellen got straight to the point. You're dealing with something bigger than a trespassing dispute. I figured. The language in that HOA letter is unusually aggressive. What does that mean? It means somebody is trying very hard to create the appearance of ownership. That was exactly what I had been thinking. For the first time, I felt like someone else could see the same pattern. We met the following morning. I brought my evidence binders. Ellen spent nearly 2 hours reviewing everything. The footage, the complaints, the legal threats, the vehicle logs, the development plans. When she finished, she closed the final binder and leaned back. You're documenting this correctly. Good. But you're looking in the wrong place. That got my attention. What do you mean? You're focused on proving the road belongs to you. It does. I know. She tapped the HOA letter. The real question is why they're pretending otherwise. There it was again. The same question that had been bothering me for weeks. Why? Ellen slid a yellow legal pad across the desk. To answer that, we need to find the subdivision documents. 3 days later, we were sitting inside the county records archive. The building smelled like paper, dust, and history. Metal shelves stretched in every direction. Decades of deeds, survey maps, development filings, thousands of pages nobody had looked at in years. Most people would have given up after the first hour. Ellen didn't. She treated records the way hunters treat tracks. Patiently, methodically, looking for patterns. Around noon, she found the first interesting document, the original Willow Creek Estates development filing, signed nearly 8 years earlier. Before a single house existed. Before Linda Carver had ever moved into the county. Before the HOA even existed. We reviewed every page, then every attachment, then every amendment. Hours passed. Nothing. Then Ellen stopped. Caleb. I looked up. She wasn't smiling, but she wasn't frowning either. The expression on her face told me she'd found something important. What is it? Come here. I walked around the table. She pointed toward a paragraph buried deep inside an attachment labeled Development Boundary Agreement. Most people would have skipped it. The paragraph was barely 6 lines long, but it changed everything. Existing agricultural roads, access routes, and service paths located on adjoining ranch properties shall remain under exclusive ownership and control of their respective landowners. No future HOA or development entity shall acquire rights through adjacency, usage, marketing, or community designation. I read it twice, then a third time. Slowly, carefully, making sure I wasn't misunderstanding it. I wasn't. The clause couldn't have been clearer. The road belonged to me. Always had. Always would. But Ellen wasn't finished. Look here. She pointed lower on the page, at a signature, then another, then another. One name immediately stood out. The original HOA board president. The very organization now claiming ownership had signed documents explicitly surrendering any future claim to the road. Years ago, before the subdivision was built, before the first homeowner moved in, before Linda started selling dreams, I felt something shift inside me. Not relief, not yet. Something closer to certainty, because now we had proof. Real proof. Not opinions, not assumptions. A signed legal agreement. But the biggest surprise came 10 minutes later. Ellen found board meeting records attached to a later amendment. The HOA had reviewed the clause 3 separate times over the years, meaning the leadership knew it existed. They had discussed it, documented it, acknowledged it. My stomach tightened, because that changed everything. This wasn't ignorance. This wasn't confusion. Someone had known the truth the entire time. Someone had chosen to ignore it. Ellen closed the file. If these records are authentic, and they are, the HOA knew the road wasn't theirs. I stared at the documents, then at the signatures, then back at the clause. The answer should have made me feel better. Instead, it made me uneasy. Because if Linda knew the road wasn't hers, why keep pushing? Why risk complaints? Lawyers, false claims, potential fraud? People don't gamble their careers over something this obvious unless the reward is enormous. Ellen seemed to read my mind. You're asking the right question. What question? She folded the copies into a folder. If Linda already knew the truth. She paused. Then what is she getting that makes the risk worth it? For the first time, I realized we weren't investigating a road anymore. We were investigating a motive. And somewhere behind the HOA complaints, the property tours, and the legal threats, there was a reason Linda Carver was willing to bet everything against a document she already knew existed. The problem was that we still didn't know what that reason was. But we were getting closer. And for the first time since this started, the advantage was beginning to shift. Linda must have felt it too. Because the next phase of the fight had nothing to do with roads, deeds, or legal documents. It had everything to do with public opinion. The first post appeared on a Tuesday morning. A neighbor forwarded it to Maggie. The message came from the official Willow Creek Estates community page. A page managed by the HOA, managed by Linda. The headline read, "Local Rancher Blocks Emergency Access Route." Below it sat a photograph of my gate. The comments were already piling up. Concerned residents, angry residents. People, repeating information they assumed was true. Most of them had never stepped foot on my property. Yet somehow they already knew I was the problem. By lunchtime, the post had been shared dozens of times. By evening, it had spread far beyond the subdivision. Maggie sat across from me at the kitchen table, scrolling through the comments. You shouldn't read these, I know. She turned the screen around anyway. One comment accused me of endangering children. Another claimed emergency vehicles couldn't reach certain homes because of me. A third insisted the road had belonged to the public for decades. Every statement was false. None of that seemed to matter. Because lies move faster than county records, especially online. The next attack arrived 2 days later. This time it came with cameras. I was repairing a section of fence when a news van pulled onto the county shoulder. Then another, and another. 3 vehicles. 1 local station, 2 regional affiliates. The reporters weren't there by accident. Someone had invited them. I already knew who. Linda stood near the gate before the first camera even came out. Perfectly dressed, perfectly prepared, perfectly positioned. The interview started immediately. I stayed where I was and watched from a distance. Linda pointed dramatically toward the gate, toward the road, toward the subdivision. Everything looked rehearsed, because it probably was. The lead reporter approached me 30 minutes later. "Mr. Whitaker?" I nodded. "We'd like your response." I considered it, then shook my head. "Not today." The reporter looked surprised. Most people would have argued, defended themselves, gotten emotional. That was exactly what Linda wanted. I wasn't going to give her the footage. The cameras eventually left. The story aired that evening. Maggie and I watched from the living room. The segment lasted less than 4 minutes. Yet somehow it managed to ignore nearly every important fact. No mention of the deed, no mention of the surveys, no mention of the development agreement, no mention of the HOA clause, just interviews, opinions, and dramatic shots of my gate. When the segment ended, Maggie muted the television. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then she looked at me. "You okay?" That question caught me off guard. Because anger wasn't what I felt. Not anymore. Anger would have been easier. Instead, I felt something heavier, something quieter. I looked out the window toward the pasture. My grandfather built this place. Maggie nodded. I know. My father spent 40 years keeping it alive. I know. And now half the county thinks I'm some greedy old man hoarding a public road. The words tasted bitter. Not because strangers believed them, because they were aimed at something bigger than me. The ranch wasn't just land. It was history. Responsibility. Family. Watching that legacy get turned into a social media villain hurt more than I expected. Maggie reached across the table. They're not attacking the truth. I looked at her. They're attacking a story. What does that mean? It means the truth still exists. She squeezed my hand. They just don't want people to hear it. The following week proved her point. The attacks continued. More posts, more interviews, more accusations. Everyone carefully designed to create pressure. But something interesting started happening. The harder Linda pushed, the more questions people began asking. Questions she couldn't answer. Questions about deeds. Questions about ownership. Questions about why the HOA had never produced actual documentation. I noticed it first in the comments, then in emails, then in phone calls. Some people still believed her. Others weren't so sure. Doubt had entered the conversation. And doubt is dangerous when your story depends on everyone believing the same lie. One evening, Ellen called. I saw the news coverage. I'm sorry. She laughed. Don't be. Why not? Because she's panicking. That got my attention. What makes you think that? People who are winning don't need public sympathy campaigns. I leaned back in my chair. Then what's she doing? She's trying to control the narrative before somebody discovers the facts. I thought about that long after the call ended. Because it made sense. The legal documents were real. The clause was real. The ownership records were real. Linda knew it. The HOA knew it. And now they were trying to win somewhere else. In public opinion, in headlines, in emotions. The problem for Linda was simple. Stories can be manipulated. Documents can't. And somewhere beneath all the noise, the truth was still waiting. The question was whether I could expose it before Linda convinced the entire county otherwise. The answer, surprisingly, was not to fight harder. It was to disappear. At least publicly. The day after my conversation with Ellen, I stopped responding. No interviews, no comments, no social media posts, no public statements. Linda kept talking. I stopped. At first, people assumed I'd given up. A few neighbors even called to ask if I was planning to settle. I let them believe whatever they wanted. Because while Linda was winning attention, I was collecting evidence. And evidence wins cases. Not attention. The first person I met was Sheriff Owen Briggs. I'd known Owen for years. He wasn't the kind of lawman who made promises he couldn't keep. When I showed him the camera footage, he watched quietly. Vehicle after vehicle crossed my property. Tour groups, potential buyers, investors. Linda leading nearly all of them. When the final video ended, he folded his arms. She's making this easy. Easy. She's documenting her own behavior. That was one way to look at it. Owen pointed toward one particular clip. Linda standing beside a group of buyers, pointing toward my creek, my pasture, my road. This one matters. Why? Because she's presenting the property as part of a sales package. I looked at him. You think that's enough? No. He shook his head. But it's a start. Then he gave me the same advice Ellen had. Document everything. So I did. For the next 3 weeks, my ranch became a research project. Every vehicle crossing, every conversation, every complaint, every HOA communication, everything went into the binders. Dates, times, license plates, screenshots, emails, videos. The stack grew thicker every day. Meanwhile, Linda became more aggressive, which was exactly what I hoped would happen. People who feel pressure make mistakes. And Linda was starting to feel pressure. One afternoon, my camera captured something unusual. A charter bus. Not a school bus. Not a tour company. A private investor shuttle. The passengers stepped out near the gate carrying folders. Several wore business attire. One carried architectural plans. I watched the footage twice, then sent it to Ellen. She called less than an hour later. That's not normal. I figured. Investors don't visit neighborhoods unless money is involved. That comment stayed with me. Money. Every path seemed to lead back there. The road, the property tours, the legal threats, the public campaign. Everything pointed toward financial motives. The question was, how much money? The answer arrived unexpectedly. Roy Henson showed up at my gate one evening carrying a package. Only it wasn't mail. It was information. I probably shouldn't have this, he admitted. What is it? Roy handed me a folded brochure. Willow Creek Estates Luxury Expansion Project. The title alone caught my attention. I opened it. Inside were artist renderings of future development phases. Walking trails. Nature overlooks. Scenic ranch corridors. My stomach tightened. Because those scenic ranch corridors were my land. Not, literally, labeled as mine. That would have been too obvious. But I recognized every landmark immediately. The creek bend, the fence line, the hill overlooking the pasture. They were marketing views that belonged to me. Roy watched my expression. Told you it was bad. Where did you get this? One of the homeowners left it in a mailbox by mistake. I flipped through the pages again, then stopped. A section near the back outlined projected property value increases, 15%, possibly more, if expansion plans succeeded. There it was. The first real clue, not proof, but motive. A powerful one. That night, Ellen reviewed the brochure. Her reaction was immediate. Now we're getting somewhere. You think this connects? I know it does. She pointed at the projected values. Those numbers aren't random. What do you mean? They're selling future access. I thought about that. The tours, the investors, the road, the creek, the brochures. Everything suddenly fit together a little better. Not completely, but enough. Linda wasn't just defending a shortcut. She was building value. Using property she didn't own. And every day that strategy continued, more people were buying into it. Literally. A week later, another piece fell into place. A former prospective buyer contacted Ellen. He'd toured Willow Creek with Linda months earlier. He remembered something specific. During the tour, Linda had described the ranch road as a permanent neighborhood feature. Not possible access, not future negotiations. Permanent access. The statement ended up in a sworn affidavit, the first of several. And once one person started talking, others followed. Quietly, carefully, piece by piece. The story was growing. So was the evidence. Meanwhile, Linda had no idea. She saw my silence and interpreted it as weakness. The HOA became bolder. More tours, more claims, more promises. Every move created another record, another witness, another document. By the end of the month, the binders occupied an entire shelf in my office. I stood there one evening flipping through them, the Faston Road. The letters, the complaints, the footage, the brochures, the affidavits. It no longer looked like a property dispute. It looked like preparation, because that was exactly what it was. Linda thought she was winning. The county thought the controversy was fading. The HOA thought I had backed down. Only a handful of people knew the truth. I wasn't preparing a defense. I was preparing a counterattack. And when it finally happened, it was going to be much bigger than a lawsuit. The idea came from a survey map. Not from a lawyer, not from a sheriff, not from revenge. From a map. Ellen and I were reviewing property records when Marta Delgado entered the conversation. Marta was a licensed surveyor who had spent years untangling boundary disputes across the county. She studied the original ranch surveys, the development filings, and the aerial photographs from before Willow Creek Estates existed. Then she pointed to something nobody had discussed before. "Caleb," she said, "this isn't technically a road." I looked at her. "What do you mean?" She tapped the map. This was originally an agricultural service path. I frowned. "That's the same route." "Yes." She traced the line with her finger. "But legally, there's a difference." I listened carefully. Marta explained that decades earlier my father had widened an old ranch service route to move cattle trailers and equipment more efficiently. Over time, the gravel surface made it look like a permanent roadway. But legally, it remained exactly what it had always been. A private agricultural access path, not a public road, not a dedicated roadway, not a transportation corridor, just part of my ranch. That distinction changed everything. Because roads create expectations. Agricultural land does not. Marta looked at me. "You know what this means?" I already did. For months, Linda had been fighting over something she claimed was a road. But if the route ceased to exist as a drivable path, there would be nothing left to argue about. No access, no shortcut, no marketing feature, no imaginary community, asset. Just ranch land. Exactly as the deed described it. Ellen smiled for the first time all afternoon. Now we're thinking strategically. The next step required permits. Lots of permits. I wasn't going to hand Linda even a single opportunity to claim wrongdoing. Everything had to be legal. Everything had to be documented. Everything had to be approved. Over the following weeks, Marta completed a formal boundary verification. The county reviewed the agricultural restoration plans. Applications were submitted. Inspections were completed. Every signature was collected. Every requirement satisfied. Meanwhile, Linda remained completely unaware. She continued hosting tours, continued advertising access, continued making promises. Every one of those promises increased the consequences waiting for her. Then the permits arrived. Approved, finalized, legal. I remember sitting at the kitchen table staring at them. Maggie looked over my shoulder. So this is it. She's not going to see this coming. No. And that was the point. Not because I wanted to surprise her. Because I wanted the law to surprise her. For months, she had treated legal boundaries like suggestions. Now, legal boundaries were about to become very real. Construction began before sunrise on a Monday. Not dramatic, not secretive, just professional. Contractors arrived with equipment. Survey stakes appeared. Utility markers were checked. Everything happened exactly according to the approved plans. By mid-morning, the transformation had started. The gravel surface that Linda loved so much was being removed section by section. The old path disappeared beneath machinery. Fresh soil replaced stone. Fence crews followed behind. Posts were installed. Wire stretched across newly restored boundaries. Every step was documented. Every step legal. I spent most of the day watching from a distance. Not celebrating, just observing. Because this wasn't revenge. It was restoration. The land was simply returning to what it had always been. Late that afternoon, my phone rang. Roy, Henson. You're going to want to see this. What happened? Linda just drove into the subdivision entrance screaming. I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I drove to the south pasture and watched the final section being completed. The following morning brought the moment everyone remembers. Just after 8 o'clock, Linda's black SUV appeared at the gate. Right on schedule. The same confidence, the same speed, the same assumption that nothing had changed. Then she stopped. Hard. The route beyond the gate no longer existed. The gravel was gone. The path was gone. The shortcut was gone. Fresh fencing stretched across restored pasture. New grass seed covered sections of exposed soil. Cattle grazed peacefully where vehicles had once driven. Linda climbed out. Even from a distance, I could see the confusion. Then the anger. Then the disbelief. She looked left. Right. Forward. As if the road might magically reappear if she searched hard enough. Finally, she spotted me. I was standing beside one of the new fence lines. She marched toward me. What did you do? Her voice carried across the pasture. I waited until she reached the gate. Then I handed her a copy of the county-approved restoration permit. What is this? The answer to your question. Her eyes scanned the document. The color drained from her face. This can't be legal. It is. You removed the road. No. I shook my head. I restored ranch land. For several seconds, she said nothing. The silence told me she understood exactly how serious the situation had become. Because this wasn't a gate she could complain about. This wasn't a sign she could ignore. This wasn't a letter she could challenge. The thing she'd been selling no longer existed. Then she asked the question I had been waiting months to hear. Where's the road? I looked across the pasture, at the cattle, at the fences, at the land that had belonged to my family long before Willow Creek Estates appeared. Then I looked back at her. On paper, I said calmly, it never existed. And for the first time since this entire fight began, Linda Carver looked genuinely afraid. The fear didn't last long. It turned into anger, then panic, then action. The very next morning, she launched what might have been the most desperate campaign yet. My phone started ringing before breakfast. First a county planning office employee, then a transportation department representative, then someone from Emergency Services Administration. All asking essentially the same question. Why had I removed a road? I gave each of them the same answer. I didn't remove a road. I restored private agricultural property under approved county permits. Every conversation ended the same way. Polite silence, then paperwork requests, then verification. Because unlike Linda's claims, my permits actually existed. By noon, 3 different agencies had reviewed the documentation. None found a problem. That should have ended it. It didn't. Linda called an emergency HOA meeting that evening. The event was advertised across social media as a community safety crisis. According to her posts, residents had suddenly lost critical access routes. According to the actual maps, nothing had changed except the disappearance of an illegal shortcut. The difference mattered. Unfortunately, panic spreads faster than facts. For 2 days, Linda dominated the conversation again. Emails circulated. Petitions appeared. Residents demanded county intervention. Several local news outlets even ran short updates about the controversy. But something was different this time. The questions were changing. Instead of asking why I removed the route, people started asking who owned it. Instead of discussing convenience, they started discussing documents. Instead of repeating Linda's claims, they began requesting proof. That shift mattered, because proof was the one thing Linda couldn't provide. The county's response arrived 3 days later. A formal review concluded there had never been a public roadway at the disputed location. No dedication, no easement, no county maintenance, no public ownership. Nothing. The report was short, brutal, and devastating for Linda's narrative. The moment it became public, the conversation changed overnight. Then came the buyers. The first call reached Ellen's office on Friday morning. A couple from Houston. They had signed paperwork for a home in Willow Creek Estates. Part of their decision had been based on direct access to ranch views and private countryside routes that no longer existed. The second call arrived that afternoon, then another, then 3 more the following week. Each conversation revealed the same pattern. Different buyers, different contracts, different sales presentations, the same promises. Exclusive access, scenic ranch routes, private countryside amenities. Nobody had been promised ownership. That would have been obvious fraud. Instead, they had been sold expectations, the kind of expectations that quietly increase property values, the kind investors love, the kind lawyers eventually discover. One afternoon, Ellen invited me to her office. The conference table was covered with documents, buyer statements, marketing materials, printed screenshots, recorded presentations. I looked at the growing stack. That's a lot. We're just getting started. Ellen slid a folder toward me. Inside were copies of promotional brochures I'd never seen. Willow Creek Estates wasn't merely advertising homes anymore. They were advertising a lifestyle. And that lifestyle included views, access, experiences, and features tied directly to my property, without ever mentioning my name, without ever asking permission, without ever owning a single foot of it. That was the genius of the scheme. And now it was becoming the problem. Because every buyer who felt misled represented potential liability. Every investor who discovered the truth represented financial risk. Every canceled contract represented money. Lots of money. The first public crack appeared when a family withdrew from a pending purchase. Then another. Then another. The rumors spread quickly. Potential buyers began asking difficult questions during tours. Questions about the missing route. Questions about access rights. Questions about ownership. Questions Linda could no longer answer confidently. One video circulating online captured a particularly uncomfortable moment. A prospective buyer pointed toward one of the marketing photos, then asked why the ranch access shown in the brochure no longer existed. Linda stumbled through the explanation. The buyer walked away before she finished. By the end of the month, the pressure had completely reversed. For months, Linda had focused attention on me. Now attention was focused on her. Residents wanted answers. Investors wanted explanations. Buyers wanted documentation. And county officials wanted clarification. Every day seemed to bring another request, another inquiry, another uncomfortable meeting. Meanwhile, I continued doing exactly what I'd been doing all along. Running the ranch, maintaining records, collecting evidence. The difference was that I was no longer defending myself. The facts were beginning to do that on their own. One evening, Maggie joined me on the porch. We watched cattle move through the pasture where the shortcut used to run. The land already looked different, quieter, whole. "She's running out of room," Maggie said. I nodded. Because she was right. Linda's strategy depended on controlling the story. But stories become harder to control when evidence starts multiplying. And evidence was everywhere now. The buyers were asking questions. The county was asking questions. The HOA board was asking questions. The only thing missing was a place where all those questions would finally be answered. As it turned out, that place was already being scheduled. And when the hearing date arrived, everything Linda had built was about to collide with everything we had documented. The county hearing took place on a Thursday morning. By the time I arrived, the parking lot was already full. Residents from Willow Creek Estates. Local reporters, prospective buyers, county officials. Even people with no connection to the dispute had shown up. Months of rumors had finally produced a public showdown. Inside, every seat was occupied. The atmosphere felt less like a government hearing and more like a verdict waiting to happen. Linda sat near the front with two attorneys. For the first time since I'd met her, she didn't look confident. She looked tired. The kind of tired that comes from defending a story that's falling apart. Ellen Price sat beside me. 3 evidence binders rested on the table in front of her, each one packed with months of documentation. Every complaint, every video, every statement, every permit, every record. The county commissioner opened the proceedings, then invited Linda's side to speak first. One of her attorneys stood. For nearly 20 minutes, he repeated familiar arguments. Community expectations, historical use, neighborhood access, public benefit. The words sounded polished. The problem was that none of them established ownership, and ownership was the only thing that mattered. When he finished, the commissioner turned toward Ellen. "Price?" Ellen stood calmly. "No speeches today," she said. "Just evidence." That sentence changed the room. She started with the deed. The original Whitaker property records. Survey maps. Boundary confirmations. County filings. Each document reinforced the same conclusion. The land belonged to me. The restored agricultural corridor belonged to me. The former service path belonged to me. No public easement existed. No dedicated roadway existed. No county ownership existed. Several officials nodded as they reviewed the copies. Then Ellen introduced the development agreement, the same clause we had uncovered weeks earlier. The room became noticeably quieter. She projected the document onto a screen. Every word appeared clearly. No future HOA or development entity shall acquire rights through adjacency, usage, marketing, or community designation. Then she displayed the signatures. Original HOA leadership, developer representatives, county witnesses. The document was impossible to dismiss. One commissioner adjusted his glasses and read it twice. Another immediately requested a certified copy. Linda avoided looking at the screen because she already knew what it said. But Ellen wasn't finished. Not even close. Next came the camera footage. Months of recordings. Vehicle after vehicle crossing private property. Property tours. Investor visits. Sales presentations. The room watched silently as Linda appeared again and again, pointing toward my land, discussing access, describing features she didn't own. One buyer in attendance shook his head. Another whispered something to his wife. The atmosphere shifted. People weren't hearing allegations anymore. They were watching them. Then came the witness statements. Roy Henson testified first. He described hearing Linda advertise private ranch access during property tours. His testimony was straightforward, specific, credible. Next came several prospective buyers. One by one, they described what they had been told. Exclusive ranch access, scenic private routes. Direct countryside, privileges. The wording varied. The promises didn't. The most damaging testimony came from a Houston family. The husband produced brochures. The wife produced notes from their sales meetings. Together they painted a picture no attorney could explain away. Linda hadn't merely implied access. She had built value around it. Then Ellen delivered the final blow. The room was already leaning toward one conclusion. Now she gave them another reason. She introduced records from a previous real estate dispute. A case from years earlier. Different county, different development, same pattern. Marketing access connected to property she didn't control. The evidence wasn't identical, but it was close enough to raise immediate concern. The commissioner looked directly at Linda. Ms. Carver, were you involved in this matter? Her attorney objected. The objection was noted, but the damage was already done. The room had heard enough. The pattern existed, and everybody knew it. Then Sheriff Owen Briggs testified. Not as an advocate, not as a friend, as a law enforcement officer. He reviewed the trespass documentation, the complaints, the reports, the timeline. His conclusion was simple. The property records consistently supported private ownership. Every official review reached the same result. No legal basis existed for public access claims. That statement landed harder than any speech, because it came from someone with no personal stake in the fight. The hearing lasted nearly 4 hours. By the end, the mood had completely transformed. Months earlier, I had been the person defending myself. Now Linda was. And she was losing. When the final session ended, the commissioner announced that formal findings would follow after review of the complete record. But nobody needed an official statement to understand what had happened. The truth had finally been organized, presented, verified, publicly. As people began leaving the room, reporters moved immediately toward Linda. Questions followed her into the hallway. Questions about the road, the brochures, the buyers, the development clause, the previous dispute. She answered almost none of them. Instead, she hurried toward the exit surrounded by attorneys. For months, she'd controlled the conversation. That control disappeared the moment evidence replaced opinion. Ellen gathered the binders. "Think that's enough?" I asked. She smiled. "It's more than enough." I looked across the room. Buyers were talking to reporters. County officials were comparing documents. HOA residents were staring at copies of records many had never seen before. The entire foundation of Linda's story had collapsed in a single afternoon. The only remaining question was what consequences would follow. And for the first time since this fight began, Linda Carver didn't seem to have anywhere left to run. The answer didn't come all at once. It arrived piece by piece, exactly the way the truth had. 3 weeks after the hearing, the county released its formal findings. The report confirmed everything Ellen had presented. The former ranch service path had always been private property. The agricultural restoration had been fully legal. The HOA possessed no ownership rights, no easement rights, and no authority over any portion of my land. That alone would have ended most disputes. This one went further. Because the road had never been the real problem. The promises were. The first major consequence came from inside Willow Creek Estates itself. Homeowners began demanding answers from the HOA board. Attendance at meetings doubled, then tripled. People wanted to know why association funds had been spent pursuing a fight the HOA could never legally win. They wanted to know who approved the legal letters, who reviewed the development agreement, who ignored the ownership records. Most of all, they wanted to know why Linda had continued making claims after the truth became obvious. Within a month, the board voted to remove her as president. The decision wasn't close. Several members publicly stated they had never been shown the full documentation. Others admitted they had trusted Linda's version of events. That trust was gone. Completely. Then came the real estate fallout. The buyers who testified at the hearing weren't interested in apologies. They wanted accountability. Several canceled contracts, others demanded refunds. Attorneys became involved. Investigations followed. The same brochures, recordings, and presentations that had helped sell homes became evidence. Every promise was examined. Every claim was reviewed. One afternoon, Ellen called me with an update. "You're going to want to hear this." What happened? The licensing board opened a formal investigation. I sat back in my chair. That was significant. In Texas, real estate regulators take misrepresentations seriously, especially when money changes hands. Weeks later, the decision became public. Linda's license was suspended pending further review. More importantly, the findings specifically referenced inaccurate representations involving property access. The wording was careful, professional, but the meaning was obvious. The walls were closing in. Civil lawsuits followed. Some settled, others didn't. I wasn't involved in most of them. I didn't need to be. The evidence already existed. The buyers had their own attorneys, their own records, their own questions. For the first time since the conflict began, I wasn't the one sitting across from lawyers. Linda was. Meanwhile, life on the ranch slowly returned to normal. That might sound simple. It wasn't. Normal had become something I missed. No more surprise vehicles crossing the pasture. No more HOA complaints. No more news vans parked near the gate. No more arguments over property that never belonged to anyone else. One morning I realized something strange. I hadn't checked the security cameras in nearly a week. Not because I'd forgotten. Because there was nothing to see. The alerts had stopped. The trespassing had stopped. The conflict had stopped. Peace had returned so gradually, I almost missed it. A few months later, the new HOA leadership requested a meeting. I agreed. Not because I wanted one. Because it was time. The meeting took place in a small community room near the subdivision entrance. The new president introduced himself. A retired school principal named David Mercer. Nothing like Linda. No speeches, no accusations, no demands. Just documents, and an apology. A formal written statement acknowledged my ownership rights and confirmed that the HOA would make no future claims regarding the property. David slid the paper across the table. We should have handled this differently from the beginning. I nodded. Yes. We'd like to move forward. So would I. We shook hands. That was the end of it. No dramatic courtroom scene, no final confrontation, just a signed document and a simple agreement to respect reality. Sometimes that's what justice looks like, not revenge, resolution. The biggest surprise came near the end of the year. The County Agricultural Scholarship Committee invited Maggie and me to attend an awards dinner. Apparently, several people had followed the story. Some local property rights groups had even used parts of the case as educational examples. The attention felt strange. I never wanted to become an example. I only wanted my land left alone. Still, if something useful came from the experience, I wasn't going to complain. That evening, one of the scholarship students asked me a question. What was the most important thing you learned? I thought about it for a moment, then answered honestly. Keep records. The room laughed. I didn't. Because I meant it. The truth had won. But only because the truth had been documented. Months later, I stood beside Maggie near the restored pasture. The old shortcut was gone. In its place stood healthy grass, fencing, and grazing cattle. Exactly what had existed before the HOA ever arrived. The setting sun stretched long shadows across the land. No engines, no arguments, no dust clouds from unauthorized traffic. Just the sounds that belonged there. The sounds I remembered from before all of this started. Maggie slipped her hand into mine. Think that's finally the end of it? I looked across the pasture, at the fence, at the cattle, at the land my grandfather bought and my father protected. Then I smiled. Yeah. For the first time in a long time, I truly believed it. The road was gone. But something far more important remained. Dignity. Truth. And a reminder that ownership isn't created by popularity, money, or influence. Ownership comes from facts, from records, from boundaries, from reality. Some people think ownership comes from money, votes, or influence. Out on the ranch, ownership comes from truth. And truth doesn't move just because someone drives over it.
If there is one lesson I take from this whole experience, is that being right isn't always enough. You have to be patient enough to prove it. Caleb didn't win because he shouted louder, argued harder, or tried to outmaneuver anyone. He kept his course, followed the law, and justice facts even when public opinion seemed to be moving the other way. In the end, the documents told the story that emotion couldn't. That's something worth remembering, whether you are protecting the range, a family home, or simply your good name. Real strength isn't always about pushing back. Sometimes it's about standing steady, staying honest, or letting the two catch up. The world can get noisy, but facts have a way of lasting longer than headlines, rumors, or weather. Now I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever dealt with an HOA and property dispute or situation where you had to stand your ground and let the facts speak for themselves? Write a yes in the comments if you believe patience and documentation still matter, or share your own story below. I read as many comments as I can, and I always enjoy hearing where folks are watching from. And if you enjoy stories about range life, property rights, quiet perseverance, and everyday people standing firm with dignity, make sure you subscribe. There are plenty more stories ahead, and I'd be glad to have you along for the ride.